This program presented by Texas Foundation for the Arts.
Houston, one of the most cosmopolitan and diverse cities in the world, has a wide variety of neighborhoods, all rich in history. Like many American cities founded in the early 1800s, the history of these neighborhoods and the people who lived, worked, and built their lives in them has faded with the passage of time. One such historic neighborhood is located on Houston's near west side, once isolated rural flatland. This area has been transformed into one of the busiest shopping destinations in America, with a workforce larger than that of many major cities. Also located here is one of the city's greatest natural resources, Memorial Park. Sometimes called the Galleria area or the Post Oak area, today its official name is the Uptown Houston District, and Post Oak Boulevard is its heart. Post Oak Boulevard, once a two-lane country road, is now a busy tree-lined avenue with a compelling mix of high-rise buildings, luxury hotels, and high-end stores. Many Houstonians think of Uptown Houston as a second downtown and a magnet for millions of international visitors who shop at the Galleria.
There's a lot of excitement in the area, there's a lot of opportunity and growth in the area, and there's a tremendous history.
In reality, Native Americans occupied areas along the rivers and bayous for thousands of years. When the first Anglo settlers came to Texas in 1820, it became a region of farms, ranches, and real estate land flips. The Post Oak Boulevard story really begins in the early 1800s, when Texas was part of Mexico, and Stephen F. Austin's old 300 colonists began to settle around the Brazos River. One of the main travel routes heading out west, the San Felipe Trail, was probably the first major road crossing Texas, and it went right through what is now Uptown Houston.
Stephen F. Austin was an impresario for the Mexican government to settle out Mexican Texas. And he was given the opportunity then to choose those individuals or families that would help settle the area.
Austin's colony settled in an area with the Brazos and Colorado rivers to the west and the San Jacinto River to the east. The headquarters of his settlement was called San Felipe, located about 48 miles west of Houston.
The town of San Felipe had several hundred people, and it was the commercial center. It's where Austin had his office and signed his land grants and that sort of thing. So it was, and it was also on the Brazos, so they shipped cotton from there.
The San Felipe Trail originated near Harrisburg along Buffalo Bayou, went through what is now downtown Houston, and then headed west.
When you go west of there, west of Loop 610, it cut across country, and the modern San Felipe Road doesn't have much to resemble it.
The early road followed the edge of the thick woods that sheltered Buffalo Bayou. It was easy for travelers to move along the prairie just outside of the trees.
And the typical thing was you could go from Houston to Piney Point on the trail in about a day. And there was a frontier inn there run by the man by the name of Buckman Canfield from about 1838. You could stay at Buckman Canfield's place in Piney Point for $4.50. That's your lodging and your meal and the feed for your mule. Then the next day you'd make it as far as Wheaton's Ford, which is where Highway 6 in Buffalo Bayou is, and there was an inn there.
From that point, the road went through what is modern-day Katy, and then on to the town of San Felipe.
Its significance was not just as the cotton, as the way to get the cotton out. That was its primary thing, which was so important to early Harrisburg and later to early Houston. It was their main commercial link to the interior. But during the Texas Revolution, it was one of the routes used for all the families that were fleeing out of there. In the 1840s, as the Germans started coming in and settling in the interior, they came up from Galveston, up Buffalo Bayou to Houston.
The German immigrants used the San Felipe Trail to move on to LaGrange, New Braunfels, and other settlements as far away as the hill country.
Their transportation was mostly in ox wagon.
The trip from Houston to New Braunfels would take 15 days if the weather was good.
Most of the early travelers on the trail, we have good accounts from the 1830s and 40s, said it was absolutely staggeringly beautiful in the spring when it was full of flowers. And there were wild horses, wild cattle, buffaloes even, along those prairies. And of course, as you got to Buffalo Bayou, there was a forest of pines, magnolias, hickories, oak, that sort of thing.
Harris County was sparsely populated at the time.
In 1830, there were some families here. There weren't an awful lot. The Mexican government had not populated it. It did not look like San Antonio. So it was pretty much wilderness with families starting to come in and starting to populate. But it was what you would think of as a pioneer area.
One family that settled in the area after moving from Louisiana was a widow, Amy White, and her children.
She was an incredibly strong woman, and she knew about the opportunity in Texas and went to Galveston and met with Stephen F. Austin and actually became one of the original 300 colonists.
Amy White settled near the San Jacinto River. Her son, William White, fought with Sam Houston and his rebel army of Texians.
When they defeated Santa Anna, Texas wanted to be able to say, their thanks to all those that fought in the war. They didn't have money, but they had a lot of land. And so they gave land grants. As a single man, William White was given approximately 1,500 acres. He chose the spot that he wanted, and that spot was Uptown Houston.
After acquiring the land, White married and returned to the General Land Office to secure additional land, which he would be entitled to. He turned right around and sold it. So history might say it's the first land flip in Uptown Houston.
They were just flipping the acreage. So there would be someone outside the courthouse waiting for them as they get their little writ, and they would buy it on the spot.
So this man, William White, was the first landowner of the Uptown Houston area.
Harris County consists mostly of flat coastal plains, crisscrossed by waterways called bayous. While most of the bayous run north and south, Buffalo Bayou runs west to east.
And therefore, it pretty much bisects the county, and that was significant. And it was navigable up to where Harrisburg was without any dredging or any major work at all. And that was also significant.
Two entrepreneurs from New York, Augustus and John Allen, arrived in Harris County looking for a site to start a new town and to make their fortune.
Well, the town of Houston got started because they had two land developers, the Allen brothers, who wanted, they were out for speculation. I mean, Texas loved land speculation and everyone that came to it.
In 1836, the Allen brothers started their new town and called it Houston. It was sited at the confluence of Buffalo Bayou and White Oak Bayou, which they viewed as an excellent shipping point for exporting goods.
They needed a port, and they needed to get cotton out of the Brazos plantations.
Buffalo Bayou was vital to Harris County, even before it became the busy Houston ship channel.
Houston became the county seat from the very beginning, so that would be 1836. The county originally was called Harrisburg County, and several years later it was renamed Harris County.
Almost immediately, the city took off. It was even the capital of the Republic of Texas for a short time.
Texas has always been about frontier growth and people coming from elsewhere.
By 1861, 13 states, including Texas, left the Union to form the Confederacy, and the Civil War began. Sam Houston, who was the state governor at the time, opposed slavery and secession. Because of his strong views, he was forced to resign from office and would never enter politics again.
But there were other things that happened during the Civil War that were really quite positive for Houston. Suddenly, tanneries were established, there was a textile mill established, there were gun works. And so the city started to develop industry where it hadn't before.
At the time of the Civil War, Harris County had about 9,000 residents.
The ethnic population was diverse.
After the 1840s, Houston was pretty much a third Anglos, Germans, and African Americans. And then after the Civil War, after emancipation on Juneteenth Day, as the slaves were leaving the Brazos plantations, they came east on the San Felipe Trail and settled on the west side of Houston in what's now the 4th Ward, and that was along West Dallas, which is the San Felipe Trail. Not all of them could find jobs in Houston, so a good number of them started working in the area around Post Oak, Uptown. In fact, at that time, from 1870, this area was majority African American.
In the years before the Civil War, several working plantations existed in Harris County, but the majority of the plantations in Texas were along the Brazos River.
Harris County had a few plantations to the east along the San Jacinto River, but not so much anywhere else. Now, that changed in 1851. A man by the name of Agar Morse came in. He was kind of late to the party. All the early settlers, the old 300 settlers, got all the good land along the bottomlands of the Brazos and Colorado rivers, where the most fertile land was.
Like most settlers in Texas, Morse lived in a log house.
It was not a grandiose plantation on the style of the ones along the Brazos. So he was just getting started. He was mainly buying up the acreage and really getting going pretty well until the Civil War came. So he started buying land in 1851. His house was where Four Oaks Place is, off Post Oak Boulevard. He had about 8 square miles, so all of Tanglewood out to Fountain View, all of Post Oak Galleria area, half of River Oaks, down as far as Westview and Southside Place in this large landholding.
Agar Morse began growing cotton on his land in West Harris County, in spite of the fact that most people thought the land was only suitable for raising cattle. Eventually, small farms populated most of the land of West Harris County.
The small farms didn't come till after the Civil War. People still had more of a plantation society, but the problem was it wasn't good for cotton. The land didn't drain. And then they raised cattle. And cattle flourished on these prairies.
The Morse family started their own cemetery in the 1850s.
Grace Morse allowed the family to be buried there, but also neighbors from the surrounding area. So a lot of the early pioneers from the area there. There are also African Americans. There's an ex-slave woman named Rachel Banks. She and her husband had worked for the Morses, and she and her children are buried in that graveyard.
Today, the historic cemetery is bordered by a cluster of residential dwellings and office towers.
In the mid-1800s, there was a great influx of German immigrants, but toward the end of the 1800s, there was an influx of Italian immigrants.
In the western part of the county, it was more ranches. In the northern part, it was small farms. But even west of Houston, eventually they started getting into truck farms.
About that same time, there was a man from Galveston by the name of Meyer M. Levy who bought up most of the land along Post Oak Boulevard and actually had it platted and subdivided into 10 and 20 acre plots. And he sold to Italian immigrants that were coming in the late 1800s, early 1900s, primarily from southern Italy and Sicily, who were looking for opportunities in America.
Houston restaurateur John M. Caraba's great-grandparents relocated from Italy to Houston in the 1880s. They acquired land near modern-day West Alabama and Sage Road, where they started a vegetable farm. As with most Italian families, everyone in the family was expected to work on the farm.
You've got a variety of Italian families that are coming in, working hard, building a life, and they're there for 50, 60 years.
Prior to 1900, mobility in the area was difficult.
Post Oak Road was an early wagon road with a ford across the bayou. There was a railroad out here that was built in 1875. The railroad went out of business in the 1890s, but the path became Westheimer Road. There was a man by the name of Mitchell Westheimer who had a farm where Lamar High School is today. And the road was really named for him because people would be going out to Westheimer, meaning to his farm.
By 1900, Harris County, with 64,000 residents, was about to see a boom in population and an uptick in business activity. The discovery of oil would change the look of the county forever.
Harris County was primarily agricultural at the turn of the century. In a couple of years after Spindletop, and they drilled for more oil, then we had tremendous oil boom in the county. If you just look at the population increase, it was just huge. Houston has always had, decade to decade, huge population increases. It was extremely busy and crowded because what you had, it was a boom town.
Many of Houston's oil-rich families built summer retreats in the Post Oak area near Memorial Park. These families would motor out to the country for the weekend.
This was really suburban Houston, where the elite of Houston had their weekend homes, their stables, their hunting areas.
They used the homes and stables for recreational activities, such as riding, hunting, and swimming. One hunting lodge that belonged to the Weiss family has been fully restored.
The Weiss family hunting lodge was built up in the early part of the 20th century in the area that's right now across from Loop 610 from Memorial Park. The architect who designed the building was John Staub, the very famous Houston architect, and supposedly modeled it after something he had seen in Virginia.
The Weiss Hunting Lodge gives a feeling of the life of the 20s, the grand style that people enjoyed in that time period.
In the 1940s, small farms still occupied most of the land in the Westheimer Post Oak area.
Many of the families who lived in downtown Houston would come out to that area to purchase their vegetables from farmers who lived out there.
There's a long tradition of tomato sales in the area, truck farmers.
I can remember riding up Post Oak Boulevard with my wife and seeing a stand where we could buy fresh tomatoes. And so on several occasions we would go and buy tomatoes there and realize that they were growing them just a few yards away.
The descendants of the Italian farm families began to lose interest in farming and started selling off the land.
Children of these farmers had decided they really didn't want to continue the farm life, and then there were jobs in Houston, and so they began to go out and find those jobs, and there was really no one to work the farms. Also at the same time, developers started seeing the area, west of town, as a great potential, and they began to buy up land.
When subdivisions came, the whole area was developing, and all the farmers were pretty much bought out at that time.
Post Oak Boulevard was Post Oak Road, and it was an asphalt road with ditches. There were no curbs and gutters.
During the 1940s, Houston developers and investors began to take notice of the potential of the Post Oak area. In 1948, what is now Uptown was far outside of the city limits of Houston. A local reporter described the roads as lonely, unlit, pockmarked booby traps for nocturnal animals and boozed-up motorists.
Houston during World War II just exploded. It had been growing anyway, sometimes at 50 to 60% increases in population from the decades before. But with World War II, the petrochemical industry really started to get built up along the ship channel. This is a place where people can come and they could find jobs and they could make money.
After World War II ended, soldiers returned home and began to look for new homes for their families. But during the war, not many new houses were built.
They didn't have the resources and the products to build homes. And they didn't have the men to do the construction. So a lot of what was built over on the west side, most of that started after the war, and a lot of it in the 50s and 60s primarily. And what happens is the outer core of Houston increases in population tremendously.
My recollection of the Post Oak area, that it was out in the country.
My earliest recollection of Post Oak and Westheimer was going to pick up feed at the Round Muto feed store, which was on the close to the southwest corner of Post Oak and Westheimer.
William Farrington, a Houston developer, began buying up tracts of lands near San Felipe and Post Oak to develop a well-planned residential community for Houston's up-and-coming families. He would name it Tanglewood.
And it was all farmland, not a tree, not a switch, not a shrub. He visualized it as a beautiful neighborhood. He planted a tree on every lot and 2 trees on every corner.
The old Post Oak Road basically had vacant lots and a few automobile repair shops and a small cafe, and that was about it.
Tanglewood was one of these subdivisions that was created during this time period that people moved out of the city to enjoy suburban life.
William Farrington's daughter, Mary Catherine Miller, helped name his subdivision.
I was reading Hawthorne's Tanglewood Tales, and my mother and father liked the name, and so they picked up on it rapidly. And so I was very close to my father, and throughout the development of Tanglewood, I helped him name the streets. And he wanted them to all be easy to understand over the telephone, easy to spell, and have R's and L's in them because he thought that was euphonious.
And it was a premier neighborhood on the west side of Houston. And as Houston grew in dynamic and business acumen and economic power, the families that were successful and up and coming, many of them moved into Tanglewood.
Mr. Farrington, I see as someone that helped kind of spearhead that growth out west of Houston past the 610 loop.
By 1949, Tanglewood was open and new residents were moving in. The neighborhood was outside the Houston city limits, and some considered it out in the country.
There was just a store on corner where Dillard's is, and it was the Voss Country Store, and that was the only telephone. So if you lived in Tanglewood, then you had to go all the way back up there to use the telephone.
When I think about Tanglewood, I remember my mother saying, why would somebody want to move way out there?
Tanglewood was 3 miles from the city limit, and that was considered very far out.
And what was different about Tanglewood was the ranch-style home. They were large, and so they were built on larger lots because they were all one story. It was very much something of its period.
Tanglewood began to attract younger, prominent Houston families, such as U.S. Congressman George H.W. Bush. 3 teenage musicians formed a band in their family's Tanglewood garage. They would go on to become one of the legendary rock and roll bands from Texas.
Billy Gibbons, at that time, his band was called the Moving Sidewalks, and now called ZZ Top.
Early Tanglewood residents complained of the lack of modern stores in the Post Oak area. That would soon change. In the late 1950s, Sakowitz, Houston's high-end specialty retailer, was considering expanding from their flagship downtown location. They began to take an interest in an undeveloped site on Westheimer Road at Post Oak. This would set the stage for development of this rural farmland.
During the construction of the Sakowitz store, which of course was previous to the Galleria, there wasn't anything along Post Oak.
It was prairie. You know, it was, you could see cattle.
There wasn't much of anything there other than farmland.
Robert Sakowitz, a former executive of the company, helped plan the Post Oak store.
My earliest memories of Post Oak area is that this is a possibility of where we wanted to go as a store. My father and I went out and sat on the corner of Post Oak and Westheimer and counted the cars as a kind of a marketing study. The whole concept architecturally was a southern colonial home, almost like a country club, to have a sense of hospitality and warmth.
It was very elegant. It was very pleasant, delightful place to be.
But we were the Lone Rangers out there. Everybody told my father, my grandfather, you know, you guys are going to lose your shirt. It is so far outside of town. But when the store opened, we got very, very good acceptance, even though we were out there by ourselves. 2 years later, of course, Josky's was built. It went way beyond my father's expectations. It was just one of those wonderful business decisions that really took off.
I remember when Post Oak became the mecca for shopping as opposed to going downtown.
Sackwoods was the only place to shop. I remember that my mother always made me dress up just to go to shop. So it was where you went for your finest clothing in that day.
Sackwoods was important to everyone because it was Houston grown. Of course, it was also a very high style shopping experience for beautiful clothes.
That's where the debutantes went to get their dresses. That is where people bought their ball gowns.
And it was the place to get your wedding dress. That's where I got my wedding dress, and all my bridesmaids' dresses came from there. It was really an experience to be able to buy your wedding dress at Sackwoods.
For nearly 75 years, Sackwoods was an integral part of the social and cultural tapestry of Houston.
The restaurant next door to Sackwoods was 2Ks, and it was both a wonderful restaurant and an ice cream parlor.
It had the little round ice cream tables with the white Carrara marble top and those chairs that looked like a heart shape. I don't know that I've ever seen any other place like that.
It was a real gathering place for, teenagers and college-age people.
Drive-in movie theaters became popular across the United States in the 1950s, and Houston was no exception. Located on a lonely stretch of Post Oak Road, where high-rise office buildings stand today, the Post Oak Drive-In screened popular movies of the day, including The Houston Story. Another popular landmark of the era was Tokyo Gardens, Houston's first Japanese restaurant.
Tokyo Gardens was a wonderful Japanese restaurant on Westheimer, just inside 610. They had a little waterway running through it, and you'd sit on the floor in Japanese style, and it was a real treat to go there.
The owners brought in architects from Japan to design the restaurant in true Japanese style.
When Tokyo Gardens opened, and it was our first opportunity to see this kind of restaurant, and you would go in and the first thing you do would be remove your shoes, and then you sat on cushions on the floor to eat.
Tokyo Gardens opened the first sushi bar in Texas. The sushi bar was small and at first catered mostly to the Japanese community. But Houstonians wanted to taste this exotic food, and soon crowds were forming outside to get into the restaurant.
And that was something different. At that time, Houston had not developed into the city that we see today with just an explosion of restaurants of every culture and every type. It was not anything we'd ever seen before in Houston.
A young engineer who moved to Houston and started up a real estate business began to make a name for himself in the 1960s. As he and his firm prospered in the Houston business climate, he would forever change the landscape of the Post Oak area. His name, Gerald Hines.
Jerry Hines began to become interested in the area, and the Galleria, of course, was constructed, and that, of course, solidified the area as a strong retail commercial area.
My first engagement there was when two of my friends asked me to participate in securing Josky's as a major tenant in that area. That became a very strong retail center with Josky's and Sackwoods on two of the corners, plus the Farrington property which had been turned into retail. And so this was the last corner to be developed. And we decided that we needed Neiman Marcus, and we convinced Neiman Marcus because we gave them the land, and that was the kickoff of the Galleria. In normal shopping centers, the basement area normally rents for about 20% of what the high fashion retail level does. And how do you get higher rental values? You get it by traffic. Well, why not an ice skating rink? So this is the job of a developer, is to come up with ways that create value and then hopefully a successful project. And Galleria is a successful project.
Gerald Hines was inspired by the historic Galleria Vittorio Emanuele in Milan, Italy. He envisioned Houston's new Galleria to be more than a shopping mall.
Gerald Hines' vision for the Galleria was, in addition to physically creating a three-level mall, his real interest was making a place that not only contained office space but also commercial space.
Texas, and indeed the nation, had never seen a shopping mall like Hines Galleria. The public was fascinated by it.
There had never been a three-level mall quite the way the Galleria was done, and that was in November of 1970. There were crowds of people. The ice rink, you could barely see the ice for the number of skaters, and it was a major change, I believe, in shopping in Houston.
I question the possibilities of an ice skating rink in a shopping center in Houston, Texas. But I sure proved to be wrong because it's still there and still functioning very, very well.
It's the brilliant idea of creating a contemporary Galleria project where people could congregate, shop, eat, and have a good time.
The other major thing that was going on at the time was the construction of the West Loop.
In a twist of fate, the State Highway Department planned for a new freeway called the West Loop to follow the path of Post Oak Road. But with some last-minute persuasion, the freeway was moved slightly to the east.
If the West Loop had been just a little bit further to the west and came down what was then Post Oak Road that became Post Oak Boulevard, there wouldn't be a Post Oak Boulevard.
Initially, the right-of-way for 610 was going to follow Post Oak Road all the way up. They ended up straightening it, making it a little shorter route, which actually created the boulevard, the Post Oak Boulevard between 610 and 59. So that created a real nice opportunity for a glamorous boulevard.
The opening of the West Loop, officially called Interstate 610, would make Uptown an easy destination for people from all over the region. Houston residents believed that there would be no more congested streets and traffic jams on the west side. The success of the Galleria would propel Gerald Hines into the global spotlight. He would go on to develop landmark office and residential buildings around the world, often with sought-after architects. Louis Sklar went to work for Gerald Hines in the 1970s, and 40 years later, his influence continues to impact the beauty and visual appeal that is seen in the area today.
One of my major projects with Hines was the planning and execution of the Transco Tower, now Williams Tower, and the Waterwall, which is now Waterwall Park. The architect was Philip Johnson and John Bergey.
The landmark Transco Tower, developed in 1983, soared 64 stories. It was then the tallest office building in the world outside of a traditional downtown business district. The searchlight beacon atop the tower is seen to this day from many miles away. The Waterwall, a multi-story fountain opened in 1985, became an extremely popular destination. The Uptown Houston District Tours purchased it in 2009 to preserve it as a public park for generations to come.
The Waterwall is a beautiful vision to look at and sound. The sound of water is always pleasing to anybody and very soothing, and it certainly seems to attract a lot of people.
The Waterwall is a great addition to our area, and really is a nice part of the Boulevard experience.
When the Galleria opened, unsightly signs and utility poles could be seen up and down Post Oak Boulevard.
Early 80s, we began to remove those either through the Uptown Management District or simply persuading the landowners and property owners to pay to put the wires underground. That, plus the removal of billboards and signs, created a place that was a little bit unusual for Houston. And so by establishing a level of quality, we were able to ensure that the entire boulevard came across as a pleasant experience and a pleasant aesthetic experience.
Post Oak became very glamorous when all of the major retail stores moved out there.
Most retailers have their best store in Houston. Many of them, national retailers, will say that their stores in the Galleria or their stores in Uptown are the best in the state or the country or wherever.
The Galleria is really an iconic institution for Houston. It's the #1 tourist destination in Houston. It is an amazing icon and amazing phenomenon. It sort of transcends a mall. It's really more than that. It's not only a place that people come to shop, but it's a place where people come to meet each other, have meetings, and to congregate and celebrate. The Galleria is a fantastic people-watching place. We have people come from all over the world. Everybody in Mexico knows about the Galleria. Over the holidays last year, we had, I think, 120 countries represented at the Galleria that come. So it really is a crossroads of cultures.
And it kind of shows the effect that vision can have on people. And so you've got to have that vision. And that's one of the great things about Houston.
In addition to all that was happening in the Uptown Houston area, the 1960s and 70s were exciting times for Houston. The arrival of NASA's Manned Spacecraft Center and the Astrodome brought international attention to the city. The Galleria was the icing on the cake that signified Houston's arrival as a major metropolitan area with attitude and Texas swagger.
But after the Galleria opened, that became even more of a critical mass between Joske's, Sakowitz, Neiman's. We got shoppers from south of the border and from Europe. The whole area became a magnet.
As the Post Oak Boulevard Uptown district grew with the addition of new office buildings, hotels, and retail, it became necessary for the creation of a management group to monitor beautification and growth in the area.
Uptown Houston's origination, its creation, was in the mid-70s. And it came about because of all the development that was happening in the area. The Galleria opened, buildings were under construction, and what the property owners, major corporations, and developers in the area needed was some communal voice that they could speak as one, what they needed to do, try to get public agencies to help solve problems, and that was the creation of the organization.
Jerry Hines, the Hines Group, proposed that we would rename the area City Post Oak, and then it was decided we would have a City Post Oak Association.
And it was known as the Magic Circle, and then it was known at the City Post Oak Association, and then it was changed to Uptown Houston.
So we began to assess ourselves enough to where we could provide the funds that it would take to at least cut the grass and plant a few trees.
And so there's been a busy coalition of folks interested in betterment of the area that have come together for a long time.
That first year, we decided to celebrate the holidays by putting 80 Christmas trees along Post Oak Boulevard. But it really led to so many other things in the area.
Post Oak Boulevard has attracted some of the world's leading architects who have created a district of stunning architectural landmarks.
Jerry Hines took a lot of pride in the architecture, for which he received the accolades he deserves because he's one of the few people who really said, let's do something of quality. Philip Johnson did some wonderful buildings.
Philip Johnson and John Berge designed the ultra-sleek Post Oak Central, a trio of office buildings that opened at different stages in the 1970s and 80s. 40 years later, Post Oak Central still commands a prominent architectural presence on the boulevard. Johnson and Berge would go on to design several major projects in the Post Oak area. Another internationally renowned architect, Cesar Pelli, was commissioned to design the four-leaf towers.
A lot of new buildings, a lot of new streets, a lot of construction, and a lot of new people.
The boulevard itself is going to become a great destination boulevard for the United States, and people will continue to want to live there, work there, shop there, play there.
More than 100 years after Italian immigrants began farming the land, an Italian businessman would arrive on the scene and see the potential of the Post Oak area. Giorgio Berlenghi would go on to develop hotels, retail centers, office buildings, and residential towers. Like Gerald Hines before him, Berlenghi would have a strong influence on the look of Post Oak Boulevard.
Well, I came in 1978, so the Post Oak area was very different, very less developed, but of course, even downtown and the entire city were less developed. But immediately gave me the impression of something fresh, new, modern. And I fell in love with the place.
Giorgio Berlenghi's four-leaf towers was a huge splash when that occurred. High-rise condominium for Houstonians, this was different.
We wanted to do projects a little different. We wanted to do projects of great quality, a bit unique. Uptown Park was my desire of doing, again, a unique, different shopping center and create a new shopping experience. In a way, it's the old-fashioned Italian concept of the piazza. You know, the little villages where you had piazzas surrounded by buildings where people would live, but in the piazza is where the merchants would come in the morning and sell their goods, and then people would drink coffee and drink wine and talk about everybody else.
His buildings would emanate an elegant Italian style and heritage.
The best example is probably our Hotel Granduca. I call it my little corner of Italy in Houston. It's a great surprise to travelers who come to Houston. They come to our courtyard, our lobby, and say, Houston, is this Houston? No, it's Italy in Houston. But that's what I'm proud of having been able to make a contribution that hopefully will last for a long time.
Ever since Buckman Canfield opened his Travelers Inn back in the 1830s, there's been a big demand for overnight lodging in the Post Oak area. Today, nearly all major hotels operate successful properties in Uptown. These hotels welcome international visitors and host large meetings and conventions.
The Uptown Houston district is Houston's hotel district.
The leadership, I think, works really hard to try to enhance that, and that's a good thing for the city.
The Uptown area would see improved landscaping and high-end architecture, but some leaders thought it still needed more of a gateway entrance to give the area a better identity.
So our desire was to take a hint from what other people were doing and make this a really fabulous place for people to shop and to do business that would have greenery and flowers.
They have done a masterful job in the boulevard, in the planning, and the landscaping.
You got to have good landscaping, good green space, good lighting, good connectivity, good traffic control, good streets, and all of the ingredients to come together.
As president of the Uptown Houston District, John Breeding has not only monitored growth in the area, but has spearheaded the landscaping and beautification of Uptown, specifically along Post Oak Boulevard.
We're known for the beautiful medians in our boulevards throughout the Uptown area.
All of that was thought out as part and parcel with the development of the area.
The street archings and the landscaping and things that really pop into mind when you think about the Uptown area. It's unique. It became something also that was symbolic of our city.
Designer Henry Beer was engaged to create the iconic look and sense of place for Uptown Houston along Post Oak Boulevard.
We retained Henry Beer, who came up with the idea of the stainless steel arches and the circles that held the traffic signals over the various major intersections. And it was a very, I think, bold and almost rash design.
In late 1988, we were contacted by colleagues and friends down here in Houston, and they had heard that Uptown Houston was beginning to think about a kind of district identity, a way to differentiate the district from the rest of West Houston as it was growing.
Beer came up with the unique idea for his design while driving through the oil fields of West Texas.
There were these remarkable eruptions of pipes and valves that would come out of the ground and then travel along and then disappear again. And being myself kind of a committed flange head, I found that to be very, not just sculptural in terms of form, but I started to think about how everything in Texas, whether it's minerals, agriculture, cattle, recreation, the oil business, the people themselves, they all come up out of the ground, have their trajectory, and then disappear back into the ground.
These huge arches were transported and erected in place in 1993.
The board was pretty committed to something resembling a gateway. But then we realized there, as we struggled with the constraints at each one of the sort of perimeter intersections that lead you into the district, it sort of occurred to us that, well, what if it isn't a gateway in the usual sense of the word? What if we suspended something magical over the intersection and the halo, the ring appeared? To me, great public art, one of the things that it has to do is invoke a sense of wonder and make you kind of scratch your head and say, how did they do that? Columns, cables, and a ring. It seems, well, what else would you do? There's sort of an inevitableness about it once it's done.
We were all very pleased with the idea of the stainless steel arches and circles. We think created an environment that made people feel like they were in a special place.
The first phase of the project was completed in 1995.
And I've been back, I don't know how many times. The thing I marvel at is every time I'm standing at the intersection next to one of those mammoth poles, it looks like they were put up about 3 weeks ago.
Property owners and developers came together to support the plan to differentiate Post Oak Boulevard from other parts of the city.
I see a lot different Post Oak Boulevard than what I saw, even 10 years ago. A lot more pedestrian friendly.
I think it's just a dream. I mean, that you could change the tacky little asphalt road with ditches on either side into a beautiful boulevard with flowers.
And every time you turn around, somebody's breaking ground on another building on Post Oak Boulevard. It just is a magic area to me.
By the year 2000, residential development had returned to the Uptown area.
When people choose to live in the area, they typically bring their pets, and then they have to go walk their pets. But that little sign that says, please pick up after your pets, is one of the great urban indicators I think there is.
The great thing I think about Uptown is the spirit that exists there.
The same tenacity, the same spirit, the same adventurism that exists today was there with some of our forefathers.
I think Uptown is the epicenter of the city, if not the state, because of the combination of retail, because of the combination of office, hotels, residential, and Post Oak Boulevard is in the heart of it.
What you have office, it's like the muscle of the area. You have retail as the heart of the area. You have residential as the soul of the area.
Uptown today has really become what I would call an icon of urban living.
You have a lot of very talented people that live and work here.
We give a lot of attention to the detail of design, how things look, how things function.
Improvements in the area include specially designed bus stop shelters, street signage, and unique crosswalk posts.
I think we capture sort of the blend of suburbia as well as urban in a mixed-use combination that's really been fun to be a part of. A lot of energy, a lot of diversity.
One observer of the Post Oak scene for almost 2 decades is Ziggy Gruber.
We've been in here for 17 years. Houston and Post Oak is one of the best things that ever happened to me. We have all types of people in here. We have people that are CEOs. We have, housewives, blue-collar guys that are plumbers and stuff like that. Our most popular sandwich is our pastrami. We're very famous for our pastrami and our corned beef here, which we cure and smoke ourselves. It's such a pleasure to eat something like that. It is just amazing.
Uptown started out as a place where you worked and you shopped. Then it became a place where you worked and shopped and ate. And then, very quietly, and really when nobody was really looking, it became a place to live.
And it's the kind of thing that we really are trying to achieve in Uptown, is to create these places where you and I can experience life in a unique way and go, this is good, I want to come back here.
One of Houston's crown jewels is Memorial Park. This enormous green space connects to Uptown Houston on the west side of the West Loop. The park is now being reimagined in order to make it a better recreational space for the city.
Important ecological restoration will take place. There are existing wetlands that will be enhanced, and it really will provide the park with an amenity it doesn't have now, which is a passive kind of recreation space to lie in a blanket beneath tall trees on grass. Buffalo Bayou is the southern boundary of the park, and a lot of what we heard in public input was a desire to have a greater awareness of the bayou, more access to it.
I don't think Houstonians realize that it's a larger piece of land than Central Park.
The history of Memorial Park and how it came to be is an interesting one. It really began with Camp Logan, the World War I training camp that was situated on the site of the future park, and many soldiers trained there before going off to World War I.
And then after the war, there were several uses of Camp Logan. It became a tourist camp. It became a tuberculosis hospital. But basically that entire land was bought up by Will Hogg, and he donated it to the city of Houston as Memorial Park.
So much has changed in the 100 years since the park was created. At that time, the city barely reached Memorial Park, and now it has engulfed it. And the amount of use, the different kinds of use have all changed. So
there's just so much to the park, so many different things that we can do. It's right in the heart of 6 million people.
Memorial Park suffered near destruction from Hurricane Ike and severe droughts that followed. Many of the wooded areas lost their forestation. Houston City Council has added the park to the Uptown TERS, which means that Uptown Houston will help fund restoration and redesign of the park.
The TERS is a tax increment reinvestment zone, and it collects taxes that then are reinvested back into the area.
we want to help implement a vision for this park.
Houston's two great urban centers, Uptown and Downtown, will be connected by Memorial Park and Buffalo Bayou Park. Uptown Houston has changed dramatically in the past few decades. Gone are the Italian truck farms, the country lanes, the drive-in movie, and even the iconic Sakowitz store. Tanglewood's ranch-style houses are quickly disappearing and being replaced by larger multi-story homes. Tanglewood helped drive future growth and development along Post Oak Boulevard. But today, new residents are mostly seeking out high-rise residential towers. Languages from around the world can now be heard in the cafes and bistros up and down the boulevard.
Perhaps the Starbucks at Post Oak in Westheimer is the most diverse international spot in the city of Houston. You know, you can go in there any time of the day and hear people from across the world.
It is a melting pot of Uptown.
You really get the cross-section of all the different cultures that are here.
Our area prospered in a time when there was a general shift nationwide from urban to suburban.
There's just an energy that it's unseen, but it's felt.
We're about the size in terms of this office market of a downtown Cleveland or a downtown Denver.
It's going to continue to be a place that evolves into a world-class destination.
And what we love about the city of Houston and its diversity, the cultures that come together, they seem to find themselves comfortably mixed along Post Oak Boulevard.
Post Oak Boulevard and Uptown Houston have evolved from a rural settlement to a major workplace and lifestyle center, drawing people from all over the world. This Houston neighborhood still retains a sense of history and community and evokes a special appeal with its exciting mixed-use setting that includes one of the country's largest urban parks. While Uptown has new names and new faces, the area today is built upon the heart and soul of its past.
I think Houston is really living in a golden age right now.
Today, the Post Oak area is a true reflection of the spirit and bold determination of Stephen F. Austin's original 300 settlers. They would be astounded to see that their once hardscrabble land was destined to become one of the great boulevards of the world.
It transports you in the middle of Houston into a very special place. And those are the qualities that a great world boulevard needs to have.